Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Well, on this occasion, I will explain a little how to determine the classification typology. First, we look at the GDP of the city of Pariaman. Now, from the table, we can see that there are business file GDP from 2019 until 2021, growth rate in percent. Growth rate and the contribution, they grow. The 2018 growth rate is obtained from 2019 minus 2018 and so on with the 2019 and 2020. After that, the average growth rate from 2018 to 2020 is calculated with using the average formula. After that, we calculate the contribution. The final result on the definite contribution is always 1%, 100%. Then we look for the average of the contribution, like looking for the previous average growth. Now, if the GDP of Pariaman has been complicated, then we will do the same step as the GDP of West Sumatra and get Sumatra Barat and get result like this. The next step is to determine. We do the same step with the PDRP Pariaman, and uh, the next step is to determine the quadrant by using a classification typology table like this. With the following information, klassen typology with a sectoral approach which can be expanded not only at the sector level but also in the subsector, business or commodities produced for sector. Classification with the different characteristics as follows. The first, sector that is developed and growing rapidly. Quadrant 1. This quadrant is a sector quadrant with a GDRP growth rate or GI that is greater than the growth of the reference area of nationally G and has a greater contribution to GRDP ISI than the sector contribution to the regional GRDP that is the reference or in general national as. This classification is usually denoted by GI greater than G and SI greater than S. Sector in quadrant 1 can also be interpreted as a potential sector because it has a performance rate of economic growth and a larger share than the reference area or nationally. And number second, the sector is developed by the present or quadrant 2. The sector in this quadrant has a GRDP growth value GI, which is lower than the regional GRDP growth that is the reference or national G, but has a contribution to regional GRDP SI that is greater than the contribution of the sector value to regional GRDP. The reference or nationally or as this classification is usually denoted by GI less than G and SI greater than S. Sector in this category can also be said to be saturated sectors. And number third, potential sector are still developing rapidly. Quadrant 3. This quadrant is a quadrant for sectors that have a GRDP growth value GI which is higher than the reference regional GRDP growth or nationally G. But the sector contribution to GRDP or SI is smaller than the value of the sector contribution to regional GRDP. The reference or nationally ICE is smaller than the value of the sector contribution to regional GRDP. The reference or nationally ICE, this classification is usually denoted by GI greater than G and SI less than S. Sector in quadrant 3 can be interpreted as a booming sector. Although the regional market share is relatively smaller than the national average. And the last, the sector is relatively underdeveloped or quadrant 4. This quadrant is occupied by sectors that have a lower GRDP growth value GI than the reference original GRDP growth or national G and at the same time have this contribution to GRDP SI, which is smaller than the value of the sector contribution to regional GRDP. The reference or nationally ICE, and from the result it is now that there are business files in the city of Pariaman in quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think enough for our explanation about typology lesson. And the last, I say Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.